Hi Rishabh. You didn't come yesterday for quiz. अरे यार, my brother is watching movie. So you didn't come for quiz yesterday. Okay, no issue. Just I will tell him just to reduce the sound. Just wait. अमन थोड़ा आवाज तुमको ना बहुत आवाज आ रहा है. Okay, so I have to study. Do you have Airtel SIM? Yes, I use Airtel. Perplexity for free. Yes, I know. I can get it for free, but it's okay. I cannot use it right now. Yes, I know. The AI app, I think, na? It's a AI app. I have ChatGPT right now, so it's fine. I mean, I don't use that much of AI right now, so I don't think I have any uses of this Perplexity app, I think. करंट इवेंट्स, हाँ वही मैं बोल रही हूँ, मेरे कुछ सोर्सेज है, मैं उससे ज़्यादा नहीं पढ़ती हूँ. इफ आई कीप ऑन रीडिंग सो मेनी सोर्सेज आई कैन नॉट रिमेंबर. द मेन आइडिया इज टू रिमेंबर थिंग्स, नॉट टू जस्ट गो ऑन रीडिंग, एंड सो दैट यू कैन इम्प्लीमेंट इट. सो आई डोंट follow too many sources. Because I don't have to study, I have to also implement it. Current news, yes, but I don't need right now current news. I have my apps, from where I do my current news. I have PIB and also I follow PIB more than any other thing. And I cannot overdo, with the news. Okay, so let's start. So, stigma and mental illness. Okay, let me start studying, because just now I had come from CCD, so I didn't study. I studied in morning, or I didn't study in the afternoon, so I have to study. ऑलमोस्ट ख़त्म ही हो जाएगा आज, तो मैं ख़त्म ही कर देती हूँ. स्टिल अलाइव, यस ऑफ कोर्स, सीसीडी स्टिल अलाइव. एक्चुअली जब उसके ओनर ने सुसाइड कर लिया था, देन उसकी डॉटर ने फिर सीसीडी को खड़ा किया. शी हैज़ डन MBA फ्रॉम सम फॉरेन यूनिवर्सिटी. बिकॉज ऑफ सीसीडी के ओनर ने जब सुसाइड किया था, बिकॉज ऑफ इंक्रीज लोन अमाउंट. और एक्चुअली ये भी पॉलिटिकल इश्यूज़ भी था सीसीडी के ओनर के साथ. वो प्रो कांग्रेस था ज़्यादातर. सीसीडी का ओनर यूपी से हट गया. ये सो सीसीडी ओनर जो था वो प्रो कांग्रेस था, नॉट बीजेपी. सो ये भी एक इशूज़ था कि उसके लोन रिलेटेड थिंग्स की वजह से उसको हेल्प नहीं मिल पाया. लेकिन उसकी बेटी ने फिर बाद में आके खड़ा किया. अभी So in Mumbai, of course, we have CCD, we have Starbucks and all. यहाँ तो अच्छे खासे ब्रांचेस है CCD के, बहुत ज़्यादा. So mental illness. So right now I'm focusing on mental illness. Although most sociological research has focused on physical illness, there's a long tradition of writing about mental illness. The majority of this sociological writing has taken to task the more traditional non-sociological approaches to mental illness. So I'll start focusing on my study right now. तो मैं रिप्लाई नहीं कर पाऊँगी, ठीक है. ये मेरे पास 1.5 आ रहा है, उसके बाद मुझे वर्कआउट एक्सरसाइज के लिए जाना है, so थोड़ा फोकस करना पड़ेगा. The majority of the sociological writing has taken to task the more traditional non-sociological approaches to mental illness. Particularly, there are two basic assumptions of the non-sociological approaches. First, that is there is such a thing as mental illness. So earlier, mental illness was not recognized at all. And second, that explanations for the illness are located in the individual experience or physical well-being of the mentally ill person. So within sociology itself, however, there are different perspectives which take rather different views on the nature and significance of the mental illness. So we are going to study mental illness from sociological perspective. So there are different perspectives on mental illness. Like there is a traditional idea of mental illness, and it is related to the individual's own perspective of mental illness. But sociology will focus upon the perspective of the society on mental illness. So one school of thought broadly mentioned interactionists. So interactionists were the first to study about the mental illness, writing disputes the very notion of the mental illness. So interactionists, they say that there is nothing as such mental illness. There is something that has been created by the psychologist. And explores the reason why certain forms of behavior, there is no such thing as mental illness according to interactionists, and they say that certain behavior, when you behave in a certain way which is deviant from the societal norms, then you are considered as mentally ill. Like you don't want to talk to any person, although it's your own idea, it's your own decision to not to talk to any person, but you will be referred as mentally ill, or you will be said by the people that you are in depression. But it's not, it's more of a social thing. So society refers certain behavior as certain behavior or certain actions as mental illness or psychological issue. Dispute the very notion of the mental illness and explores the reason why certain forms of behavior are viewed as mental illness, and why certain people come to be labeled as mentally ill. क्यों कुछ लोगों को mentally ill बता दिया जाता है, क्योंकि उनका behavior societal norms से अलग होता है. That's why they are considered deviant and mentally ill. So they are saying there is no such thing as mentally ill. Is a society who has created mentally ill person, because their behaviors are different from that of the normal behavior that how a person should behave in the society. So in a similar view, Foucault also argues that mental illness is constructed, though he does not agree with specific interactions argument. Okay, so who has created mentally ill? So there's a famous study of Michael Foucault where he says that it is the psychologists. They have created a discourse. They have the knowledge about the mentally ill. So they have the knowledge. So they have created a discourse on the mentally ill, and the psychologists have referred certain behavior as a psychological issue or mental illness, because it is very different from the normal way of behaving, and because it has led to the classification between what is a normal mental behavior and what is abnormal mental behavior. Hi Jart, मैं अभी रिप्लाई नहीं कर पाऊँगी बिकॉज पढ़ना है. 11 o'clock क्विज़ में आ जाना. कल तो आए नहीं थे, बट यू कैन कम टुडे इफ यू आर इंटरेस्टेड. And I'm fine. Foucault also argues that mental illness is constructed though he does not agree with the specific interactions argument. A second approach, which we can term structuralist, broadly accepts the notion of mental illness, but examines the way in which it is unequally distributed across the various social groups in the society. Now, mental illness as a social construction. So we are going to identify the issue how mental illness has been constructed by the society, and who has dominated a discourse on the mental illness, and why certain form of behavior or certain form of behavior of the individual lead to the categorization of the individual as mentally ill. So Thomas Keff, being mentally ill. So mental illness is a social construction. Thomas Keff, being mentally ill. Purport, madness and civilization, structural explanation for mental illness, and death and dying was thoughts. Okay, it's Thomas Keff. Thomas Keff, being mentally ill. So Keff argued that there is no such thing as mental illness. Instead, it is better understood as a category for all bizarre behavior. That's what I was saying. So the social construction, instead, it is better understood as a category for all bizarre behavior that cannot be explained through other means such as alcohol or drug use. Keff argued that people who have who behave bizarrely and Keff argued that the people who behave bizarrely are not mentally ill, rather their behavior does not make sense to others. So that's how mental illness is a social construction, it's not an individual construction. People who are not mentally, rather their behavior does not make sense to others. He claimed that most people pass through periods in their lives when they might behave oddly, but in majority of cases this behavior is not labeled as deviant and therefore has no consequences. It is only a small minority whose behavior comes to be regarded as evidence of mental illness. Keff says a stereotype image of the mental illness is learned in early childhood and continually reaffirmed advertently in ordinary social interaction. Okay. Keff says stereotyped image of the mental illness is learned in early childhood and continually reaffirmed in ordinary social interaction. The way we view and respond to mental illness is the result of the wider socialization process. Going mad, acting like a lunatic. The way we view and respond to social is the result of wider socialization process in childhood. Going mad, acting like a lunatic, and then this is strengthened by the media images of the mental illness, especially in films and in the press reporting of the crimes committed by mentally ill people. Okay, according to Keff, so the thinker Thomas Keff, being mentally ill, mental illness, bizarre behavior, what we call as a mental illness, is socially constructed. And if we look at the Michael Foucault work, then Michael Foucault says that this is a discourse that is dominated by the psychologists are the one who created the mentally ill, because they have dominated discourse of who are categorized as mentally ill and or deviant or normal thinking people. So this is the thing. So bizarre behavior does not make sense. Okay, people pass through periods in different, on a certain small minority whose behavior come to be regarded as mental illness. Stereotype image of the mental illness is learned during early childhood and continually reformed. The way we view and respond is a result of the wider socialization process. Going mad, acting like a lunatic, and then this is strengthened by the media images of mental illness, especially the films and the press reporting of the crimes by the mentally ill people. According to Keff, not only do most people then recognize mental illness through these stereotypes, but also people who are labeled as mentally ill will be influenced by the same stereotypical images which will guide their behavior. So there's a recognition of the mentally ill people through these stereotypes. Those not only do most people then recognize mental illness through this stereotype, but also people who are labeled as mentally ill will be influenced by the same stereotypical images, and which will guide their behavior. Okay. Scaf work open a range of questions about the reality of the Thomas Keff. So, being mentally ill, bizarre behavior, socially constructed, media images and all. Bas. So not only do most people then recognize mental illness, okay, Skeff work up a range of questions about the reality of the mental illness and how it is defined. However, two questions remain. Why are some people labeled mentally ill? Some people behave in abnormal way, but they are not labeled as mentally ill. But other people who also behave in a deviant way, a more extreme deviant way, they are labeled as mentally ill. So why some people are labeled mentally ill while others are not? Though both of them behave bizarre in the society. And what are the consequences of being labeled mentally ill? So what are the consequences? Stereotypical isolation, alienation, and all those things. And then you move to also psychologists, and economic wise also there is a consequences. Erving Goffman is a very famous thinker of mental illness. Erving Goffman and Thomas Keff being mentally ill. Yes. Okay. So mental illness के ऊपर कोई भी क्वेश्चन नहीं है. Stigma, disability के ऊपर कोई भी क्वेश्चन. Then we have here about the physical capital, power of the physical capital, symbolic capital. And how inability, physical inability transforms into disability, right? So why are some people labeled as mentally ill by others, and what are the consequences of being labeled as mentally ill? So labeling theory of deviance. So we can write the Thomas Keff and Hogman and through Michael Foucault and Erving Goffman as well. Yes. So this is the thing I think we can do till here. Let me put a timer. What's the time? 5:57. I think. 60. You can do it. You can put it till half an hour, and half an hour will do this. Oh, fine. So mental illness as a social construction, Thomas Kev, Irving Goffman. Irving Goffman suggested that people are labeled mentally ill when it is in the interest of others to label them so. So Irving Goffman suggested that people are labeled mentally ill when it is in the interest of others to label them. So, for example, Langstrom's study of the schizophrenia is an examination of the family lives of a small number of schizophrenics. One case study concerns Maya, but who entered hospital 10 years before the start of the study as a voluntary parent suffering from paranoid schizophrenia. Entry to hospital has resulted from her parents approaching the social services departments. Approaching the social service departments to express concern that their daughter had largely withdrawn from social interaction with them but had on several occasions threatened to poison them. So the people are living mentally ill because the interest of the others to the मैंने पढ़ा था. When Lang and studied the home circum, they found out that the parents had flatly refused to accept their daughter was growing up and had themselves acted in a bizarre and apparently conspirational ways. Such as whispering behind her back and spying on her. Rather than being paranoid, Maya was really experiencing the behavior which her parents claimed she had invented. By imposing a definition of mental illness on their daughter's action. So by imposing a definition of mental illness on their daughter's action, they successfully prevented her from gaining independence. This illustrates their argument that people have the level of deviant imposed on them by others who will benefit from them. So Irving Goffman studied case study of the girl and how their parents behaved at home, study the home environment, home circumstances. That the parents had refused to accept that their daughter was growing up, had themselves actually in bizarre ways. So what is socially constructed benefit to the others? So labeling theory of deviance of labeling theory of mental illness that benefit the others. It is imposed on them by others who will benefit from this process. Now moving towards according to Goffman, once someone is labeled as mentally ill, the others treat them differently. Good thinkers. Such for thinkers. Right, yes. Issue. Issue significance better. Right, yes. So according to Goffman, once someone is labeled as mentally ill, the others treat them differently. Labeling theory of deviance. If someone is referred as a thief, then the whole world will start calling them thief. Yes. So according to Goffman, when someone is labeled as when someone is labeled as mentally ill, the others treat them differently, reinterpreting what the mentally ill person says or does. Right, yes. Right. Okay, so when according to Goffman, when someone is labeled as mentally ill, then others treat them differently, interpreting others treat them differently. When someone is labeled as mentally ill, then others treat them differently, reinterpreting what the mentally ill person says or does. Goffman called this spurious interaction. So it's a very interesting or spurious interaction, meaning that whatever action the person undertakes will be evaluated with the. So slowly downloading. Okay, so government call this spurious interaction, meaning that whatever actions the person undertakes will be evaluated with the knowledge that the person is mentally ill. And therefore what they say or do cannot be taken at the face value. The social interaction is spurious in the sense that the views of the mentally ill person are not counted as equal to the views of the normal person. So slowly conversations and study. Government illustrated this in asylums. So government illustrated in asylum where he explored the life of the people labeled as mentally ill who were committed against their will to a mental hospital. Illustrated this in asylum. So even government policy study as government issues of the bullet how mentally ill is a social construction is based on labeling theory and the case study how one benefits by labeling other, one benefits from this process by labeling other as mentally ill. During when someone government listed business and very explore the life of the people labeled as mentally ill. Explore the life of people labeled as according to the topic. So government studied very explore the life of the people as mentally ill who were committed against the will to mental hospital, committed against their will to mental hospital. Kaufman concluded that in 66% of the committal interviews he attended, the legal criteria for involuntary committal were not met. Even when there was little evidence for committal, the psychiatrist felt that it was better to commit the person rather than run the risk of them hurting others or themselves. In one of the committal disorder. So Goffman studied asylum where he explored the life of the people labeled as mentally ill who were committed against who were committed against their will to a mental hospital. Government concluded in 66% of the committal interviews attended, the legal criteria for involuntary committal were not met. Even when there was a little evidence for committal, the psychiatrist felt it was better to commit the person rather than the risk of them hurting others or themselves. In one of the committal interviews, Goffman provided an excellent example of spurious interaction. When the psychiatrist concludes the proceedings after only 8 minutes and comments, I don't bother asking them one more question because I know what they're going to say. So, spurious interaction wherein the psychiatrist concludes the proceedings after only 8 minutes and comments. Psychiatrist idea. Concludes the proceedings after only 8 minutes and comments. I don't bother asking them schizophrenics more question because I know what they're going to say. Okay. So once in an institution, inmates' behavior is routinely treated as evidence of their problems. A famous example of this is Ross and Hans study where researchers presented themselves at a number of US mental hospitals and asked to be admitted as voluntary patients. On the grounds that they were suffering from schizophrenia. None of the researchers had ever demonstrated signs of mental illness. Once they were admitted, all the research acted perfectly normally. So, however, this behavior was simply seen as evidence of their schizophrenia. For example, when also examined the medical documents of one psychiatric nurse concerning a researcher who had been taking notes for the study, the nurse had written patient manifest writing behavior. Even in conversation with doctors and nurses, the researcher found that what they said was routinely ignored or reconstructed to fit what the medical staff felt. Ross and Hans study. All these are acted perfect normally, however, this behavior is simply seen as evidence of their schizophrenia. For example, when I was examining the medical documents of the psychiatrist was considering a nurse who had been taking notes for the study, the nurse said the patient manifest writing behavior. Even in conversation with doctors or nurses, the researcher found that what they said was routinely ignored or reconstructed according to fit the interpretation, to fit with that of medical staff, felt comfortable hearing rather than what was actually said. Government suggests that part of the process of becoming mentally ill. So government suggests the part. So that part of the process of becoming mentally is linked to the way in which a person's presenting culture is stripped off. So, government present is part of the process of becoming mentally. Part of the process of becoming mentally is linked to the way in which a person's presenting culture is stripped from their what they enter mental. What they enter is mental. By presenting culture, government means the way in which people choose to portray themselves presenting culture. Process of becoming mentally is linked to the way in which a person presenting culture is stripped off from what they had from them when they enter a mental hospital. Representing culture government means the way in which people choose to portray themselves to others through their language, accent, hair, clothing. Once in mental institution, the patient's self-image is taken away from them and they are expected to conform to the institutional rules. Failure to conform can be seen as evidence of mental illness and the need for medication. Criticism. So what will be the criticism? So being government criticism that mentally socially constructed and the one who benefit from the process. How the concept of the mentally ills are treated, how their self-image is taken away. So if we want to criticize them, so they have neglected the criteria. The labeling theory approach to mental illness are both overstated and largely incorrect. Gov argues that in vast majority of cases, those people who receive psychiatric treatment have a serious mental problem that needs treatment and exists before any label applied. Those people who receive psychiatric treatment have a serious mental problem that needs treatment and exists before any label is applied. Labeling theory does not adequately explain the reasons why some people develop mental illness and others do not. Some people say that society is socially constructed. Interaction people labeled as those who benefit from. There is no such thing as mental illness, but they're labeled as and it's a socially constructed. So labeling theory does not adequately explain the reasons why some people and others are not, even when they come from similar social backgrounds. Government coverage is also the way that most people respond to mental illness negative, and instead that many people around the mentally ill person is supportive. Family members and friends only apply mental illness as a last resort after desperately seeking for others. Now, for what madness and civilization is an important topic of mental health. So we have the socially constructed Irving Goffman views, the socially constructed views, the self-image view, interactions view, labeling theory, socially constructed Irving Goffman, and we have the study of Rosenhan study, and then we have the Michael Foucault. So interactionist, Irving Goffman, Thomas Schaff. Yes, so we have Thomas Schaff being mentally ill. What is being mentally ill? Being mentally ill is a social construction. Then we have the Irving Goffman idea of mentally ill, how that people labeled as mentally ill, bizarre activism. Then we have the case study, and then we have now moving towards the Foucault madness and civilization. So Michael Foucault, the idea of madness and civilization. Structural explanation for mental illness. mental illness and social class. Then we have death and dying. Okay. Foucault provided a very different account of mental illness from that of the interactions or structural perspective. So Foucault provided a very different account of mental illness from that of the interactionist or structuralist writer. Foucault set out to show that modern concept of madness. Yeah, so he primarily writes about the social change and the origin of the mental illness. So Foucault set out to show that modern concept of madness developed as a result of the increasing emphasis of society in the 18th century on rational and disciplined action. For this to be highlighted, there needs to be an opposite form of behavior, as rationally and discipline cannot exist without their opposite, irrationality and unpredictability. So the concept of madness, how modern concept of madness as a result of the increasing emphasis of society in the modern 18th century rational and disciplined action. For this to be held, there needed to be an opposite form of behavior, as rationality and discipline cannot exist without the opposite, that is irrationality and unpredictability. Foucault suggested we can only understand medicine within the social world in which it takes. The body, mental illness, and the whole surrounding medical discourse are all socially based, reflecting the larger political and the social events. Above all else, medical knowledge is a part of a trend towards greater discipline, greater surveillance, and control over the population. A good example of how people began to be classified into classification into normal and a deviant. 11 minutes. A good example is how people began to classify it into normal and the deviant is a new category of people who were deemed to be mad. In his analysis of mental illness, Foucault argued that the asylum for the mentally ill emerged in the 18th century, a period in which the power of reason as opposite to religion was applied. And coming to be regarded as preeminent mode of thoughts. So ideas of madness and civilization, madness as social construction, how it emerged, the discourse of the medical science, classification of the normal and deviant from rationality and discipline to irrationality and unpredictability, and a discourse of the medical science, the body, mental illness, and the whole surrounding medical discourse, all are socially based, socially related, reflecting larger political and social events. Above all, medical knowledge is a part of the trend towards greater discipline, surveillance, and control over the population. A good example of people can be like normal and deviant is a new category of people who are deemed to be mad. In his analysis of illness, Foucault argued that the asylum for mentally ill emerged in the 18th century, a period in which the power of reason as opposed to religion and belief was coming to be regarded as a preeminent mode of thoughts. This growing superiority of rationality developed with the growth of capitalism, as the emphasis on rational disciplined actions developed. So undisciplined irrational behavior came to be defined as mental illness. Right. So whatever you read, make into questions, right? Yes. You're going to ask me about mental health. I'm going to quote Michael Foucault, Thomas Schaff, Erving Goffman, right? Yes. Interactionist, social construct labeling theory, and all, and the case study of Rosenhan. As emphasis of rational discipline actions developed, so undisciplined irrational behavior came to be defined as madness, and people exhibiting such forms of thought were confined, controlled, and repressed. Foucault argued that in France, such people literally took the place of the lepers in the institution that had previously been built for their isolation from mainstream society. They also figuratively took their place as a new race apart who were threatening the rational discipline society. Once in the institution, the inmates could be monitored, categorized, and subjected to a form of invasive treatment. Invasive treatment. Structural explanation of mental illness. How many minutes? 8 minutes. So if you see the whole idea of the mental illness, the whole idea of differently abled, disabled from physical impairment to disabled, how society views disability, um, and their own self concept about the disability, the how the media views differently able people, stigmatization. As Oliver, a social. So if we write about disability, if this is a question, then we can write about Oliver, a social model of disability, capitalism and disability, of course. So the Marxist perspective is also there. So Oliver, social model of disability, from physical impairment to disability, right? Yes. So capitalism and Marxist approach, period write about important is of power, physical and symbolic disability. What the power and physical capital? Because they lack symbolic capital, they lack physical capital. Okay. Definitions of normality. What is normal and what is deviant, or able body and all. The postmodern contribution to disability, that is language use and binary notion. Again, that is disabled. And it's only there is opposing notion of normality or able bodiness. Yes. So we know this, right? So when there is a topic on, when there is a question on disability, then what thinkers we can write? So essay by night, right? So when there is a topic on disability, then what thinkers we can write? That is Oliver, the social construction of disability, social model, and Marxist is there. Oliver is there. Marxist is there. Pierre Bourdieu is there. That is the physical disability, symbolic disability. Yes, physical capital, symbolic capital, economic and cultural capital. Okay. And then we have the postmodern perspective to understanding disability. Corker and Shakespeare. Indiscipline and stigma by Erving Goffman, stigmatization. We also have Erving Goffman discrediting stigma and how it has led to the stigmatization. There was a narrative of risk. It is understood. And Erving Goffman stigma and then we move towards stigma and mental illness. So disability को कैसे वो लोग डील करते हैं, discrediting stigma, discreditable stigma, discreditable stigma. तो बोल stigma के ऊपर कोई क्वेश्चन नहीं होगा, right? So disability के ऊपर कोई क्वेश्चन, then we can quote Oliver, we can quote Pierre Bourdieu, we can quote postmodern and capitalism. ठीक है. If any question is about mental illness, then we can quote interaction and labeling theory, we can quote Erving Goffman, we can quote Michael Madness and Civilization, Michael Foucault, Madness and Civilization. And Hitler's origin. Asylum, right? His work Asylum. From rationality to discipline to rationality to unpredictability. Okay. I'm moving to a structural explanation for mental illness and social class. mental illness in minority and ethnic groups. Death की proportion में लगाते हैं. Okay, an alternative sociological approach is to accept that there is such a thing as mental illness, but to relate it to different positions within the social structure. Those people with the fewest resources are most likely to face high level of stress, which can lead to mental illness. From the structural perspective, such as accept this such a thing. Brown and Harris conducted a number of studies on women with depression from different social class in London. They concluded the key to understanding depression lay in two factors. The first of this was major life events. They conclude the key to understand depression lays into for the first is a major life events which could be short term like divorce and long term, short term like divorce and long term poverty. The second was protective or vulnerability factors, the extent to which people had a supportive network to help them cope with the life events. Brown and Harris found that the working class women were more likely to have major life events that could lead to depression. And the working class women were 5 times more likely to develop depression than the middle class women. Brown and Harris. So what Brown and Harris research appears to confirm is that working class women are more likely to be faced with stressful because of poverty and different life events or short term and long term life like divorce and poverty. And appears to confirm that working class women are more likely to be faced with stress-like circumstances which can lead to depression. There is an inadequate set of supportive relationship to help them. Mental illness and social class, mental illness and gender, mental illness and ethnic groups. There is a question: mental illness, disability. You can write Oliver, you can write disability. Pere Bourdieu, are a postmodernist. Binary notion. About the body. The body as a consumption and how we can change the body. So mental illness studies of social class background, and mental illness clearly shows that mental illness is not distributed randomly across the classes. According to Roger Gomb, for nearly every kind of mental illness, poor people have afflicted more than the richer people. More than richer people, more often, more seriously and longer. Freud reviewed the evidence for the relationship between employment patterns and mental health and concluded that unemployment has a direct effect on an unemployed person's health. And also on that of their family. Children's school performance tutorials, for example, are more likely to exhibit mental health problems.